Damn! Another important week with Susan and now an urgent call from the boss, thought Darwin, lifting a large suitcase with one hand and a briefcase with the other. With no hands free, he pushed the door from the kitchen to the garage with his hip. It swung open with a bang, rebounded from the stop, and hit him hard on the shoulder. When he got home, he would fix that damn latch. He just didn't have enough time to spend with his family and do his usual chores. Stuffing the bags into the trunk of his Ford Taurus, Darwin slammed the lid shut and then yanked open the driver's door. It swung out with force, hitting his new BMW and scratching the paint. Typical of his luck. If he had to scratch a car, it might as well have been the company Ford, not his beloved BMW. Settling behind the wheel, he pondered his loss of control and the unfairness of the world. Quietly cursing the damage to his BMW, he opened the garage door and drove out onto the driveway. Turning onto the street, he glanced at the front door, then at the master bedroom window. Susan hadn't come out to see him off, but he thought he saw the curtains move. He hoped his wife had calmed down enough to at least see him off as he left for another damn week of repairs. If she did come out, she didn't wave goodbye as he drove away. The phone rang just before 9 in the morning, just in time not to interrupt their morning sex, but not so late that Susan had time to fully enjoy the post-sex bliss she loved so much. Me too, he thought. Darwin had promised her a fun night out on Saturday, and tomorrow morning they were going to leave for their lake house. It was already August, and they hadn't been to the lake once all summer. She was furious. He was disgusted, and the equipment at the factory in Houston was on siesta. He hoped he could get it started without another week there. The last time in Houston, it took 3 weeks. He couldn't get it through the factory manager's head that scheduled maintenance wasn't a waste of money on something that looked nice. Damn it, he thought. Houston in August, and my wife thinks this is some kind of pleasure trip. I should have taken her with me. This was his third emergency trip of the summer. No wonder Susan was furious. Damn it. It made him angry, too. In a way, he was glad he'd missed the evening. Susan had planned it with her best friend Darla and Darla's husband. He liked Darla. She was funny and smart, and she had model looks and shiny blonde hair. Darla and his petite wife Susan, with her curly hair, made a beautiful couple. But her husband, that leech Randy, was a different story. That son of a bitch was always hitting on Susan. He did it even when Darwin was there, and he didn't seem to care that Darla was nearby. The last time they went out, Darwin casually mentioned to Randy that the next time he caught his hands on his wife's ass while dancing, he would break his arm. He was a big, sloppy former college football player, a defensive lineman, and he laughed at Darwin. Well, I'll be happy to show you how it's done. The thought struck him. He figured Susan would cancel the evening. He hadn't discussed it with her. He didn't want her going out with that bastard, even if Darla was with them. Susan was angry enough to spend an evening out on the town without him. Things hadn't been going well in his marriage lately. Susan had been talking about having children, and he liked the idea. But he wanted to be there to coach his daughter's softball team or his son's Little League team. And he didn't want to just hear about his children's exploits on the football field. His work schedule didn't allow for that. Susan was getting very impatient. She wanted children. Judging by how the money from his investments and bonuses was piling up, he would soon be able to afford to quit his 9-to-5 job. Hell, he hadn't worked 40 hours a week since the Truman administration, and his parents weren't even born then. "Damn it, this is just awful!" he raged as he sat behind the wheel. He had promised his wife that those hours would be a thing of the past once he had saved enough money. She just needed to be patient, that was all. An idea struck him. He hated it when that happened. He hadn't checked his author account at the bank. He wrote dirty romance novels for an e-book publisher under the pseudonym D. Troubadour. He put his royalties and other earnings into an account in his name. He planned to surprise Susan one day, but she still didn't know anything about it. The amount in the account was becoming impressive. Not what a real author could earn, but not bad for an amateur writing in his spare time. The money was untouched, just sitting there earning minimal interest. To tell the truth, he loved to write, even if it was hard work, but he was ashamed of the genre. He wrote novels. He liked those damn things. He loved reading them and he loved writing them. But deep down he thought that it was weak for a man to read them, let alone write them. Damn, he thought, I even hid my pen name so that women would think the author was a woman. He had enough time to catch his flight. He decided to check how much money he had in his account. Turning right at the next intersection, he headed for his bank branch. Driving through the drive-through window, he used his bank card to access his author's account. Damn, he blurted out before he could stop himself. The money had been coming in steadily, and he had accumulated a decent amount over the past year. But suddenly it had tripled. He remembered that he hadn't looked at his account since January, and his adventure novel had been published in February. Then he finished the novel he had been planning for a long time. Damn it, there was more than $250,000 there. Their investments, savings, and bank account were more, but they grew over time. It was unreal. He had enough capital to retire and live off the interest if he was careful and frugal. And he had no intention of giving up writing. As he pulled onto the road, his thoughts raced at a mile a minute. Damn it! I don't have to be in Houston until tomorrow? The only reason I'm leaving today is because of my boss's insistence. Darwin wouldn't be at the factory until late tomorrow night. He'd just be rotting in a hotel, and nothing would get done until Monday. His bastard boss just wanted to show his boss how well his department was doing. To hell with it, he said. I'm going with Susan tonight anyway. Stopping at a 7-Eleven, he called the airline from his cell phone and changed his first-class ticket to tomorrow. That'll give me time to sober up, he grinned. Driving slowly, anticipating the pleasure of telling Susan the news, he returned home an hour and a half after leaving. The shadows were getting long as he pulled into the garage. As he opened the door, he remembered and grabbed the door in a panic to keep it from slamming against his BMW. But damn it, the BMW wasn't there. Susan's Volvo was in its place, but his BMW was gone. Susan was truly furious when she peeked through the curtain and saw Darwin driving away. She had warned that son of a bitch not to do that to her again. She wanted a real family life with children and everything else. And her asshole husband only cared about his career. To hell with that stupid bastard, she thought as she took off her clothes to take a shower. She was going out tonight, with or without that son of a bitch. She picked up the phone and called Darla. Hi, sweetie. Is everything ready for tonight? She asked. Absolutely, Darla replied. The order's placed. I'm ready to go, and Randy's getting dressed. Wait, honey, Susan replied. My asshole left for Houston, the most godforsaken place in August, but I'm going to take a shower and be ready in record time. Hey, I'll meet you at your place and we'll go to the restaurant together. See you in 30 minutes, okay? Bring your handsome husband with you. See you soon. Darla agreed. The two women made up and hung up. A few minutes later, Susan was rinsing her short blonde curls in the shower. They reached her ears, and the curls gave her a just-out-of-bed look. Darwin liked it very much. After quickly washing her back, she turned off the tap and grabbed one of the large bath towels. A few minutes later, she was already rummaging through her wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear. She was so annoyed with Darwin that she wanted to look really sexy tonight. Hell, maybe she'd even do something about it. He would never know, and she deserved it. Until that bastard gave her child back, she wasn't going to feel like a married woman, so whatever happened would be on his conscience. She giggled at the unintended double meaning. Picking up the blouse and skirt she was going to wear, she turned to the dresser. She wanted to not only look sexy, but feel bold. It's kind of nice to dress up like this for Randy, she thought. Randy has been too obvious with Darwin. Maybe we can talk or something and get him to back off Darwin. She giggled. Randy will be surprised when Dar finally takes him to the dry cleaner. That big oaf has no idea what my little man is capable of, she thought. Or my little man's big man? She giggled again. It won't be easy to become a soccer mom, she thought, but I'm looking forward to it. I'll be a good mom. Less than an hour later, she was dressed and ready to go, left a message on the answering machine, and got into her BMW to meet Randy and Darla. She loved her Volvo, but tonight was a BMW night. When he entered the house half an hour later, Darwin called out to Susan, but there was no answer. He didn't wait. He picked up the phone and dialed the code to listen to the answering machine. His wife thought he was on a plane to Houston, and if she was going out, she would leave a message on the answering machine. Susan's voice sounded sweet and friendly. "Hi, guys. We can't answer right now, but we'll call you back tomorrow." "Darwin, honey. If that's you, I'm at Darla's for a few hours. Talk to you tomorrow." "Bye." God, she couldn't even wait until next weekend. Damn it, he thought. I'm already here, and I'll be damned if I'm going to wander around the house until she gets back tonight. After showering, he put his travel suit back on. He didn't know why he did it. It just seemed like the right thing to do. He was at the restaurant where they had planned to start the evening, a few minutes before the appointed time. Looking around the room, he spotted Susan and her friends in a secluded corner at the back of the restaurant. They were sitting by the window, separated from the rest of the room by a box of ferns. He wouldn't have found them if he hadn't been sure they were there. He headed in their direction, but the arrangement of the tables stopped him. Randy was sitting against the outer wall, with Darla on one side and Susan on the other. Randy had his arms around both women's shoulders. He whispered something in one of their ears, then turned his head to whisper in the other. From where he stood, he couldn't see, but it looked to him like the son of a bitch was licking her ear along with his whisper. The son of a bitch would pay for that. Looking at Randy's hand around his wife's waist, at his hand unconsciously playing with the collar of her almost transparent cream-colored silk blouse, he stopped. If he went over there, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from throwing that man out of the restaurant. This was hardly the scene he wanted to make, and it wasn't the way to make Susan glad he had come. Looking at the three of them, he suddenly realized that under her white blouse, she was wearing a red half-bra. God, up close, he must be glowing like a beacon. As he watched, the waiter brought drinks for the three of them from the bar. They must have just sat down. Randy's glass was half full, as was Darla's. Susan's glass was almost empty, and as he watched, she sent the waiter to bring her a new drink while they studied the menu. The drink looked like one of her favorites, a strawberry daiquiri. Darwin watched as she drank half of it, and then set the glass down on the table. Darwin headed to the bar and sat down in a corner where he couldn't be seen but from where he could observe what was happening at the trio's table. After ordering a drink, he asked the bartender to bring him a club sandwich. Darwin sat at the bar, eating his sandwich and sipping his scotch and soda, watching the scene behind the ferns. He couldn't believe his eyes. Before dinner was even served, Randy had his hands down both girls' blouses. Darla showed no sign of indignation, behaving as if her husband groping her best friend was perfectly normal. Perhaps it was. By the end of dinner, Susan had had 2 more daiquiris and was clearly drunk and cheerful. Randy didn't seem to feel the effects of the alcohol, and Darla appeared completely sober. However, knowing her, Darwin was sure she was at least a little drunk. Darla must have been quite drunk for no one to notice. After dinner, the group had an after-dinner drink that looked like a brandy Alexander, as far as Darwin could tell. When the bill came, Darwin watched with disgust as his wife grabbed it, took a credit card out of her purse, and apparently paid the entire bill. Stingy Randy didn't even make an attempt to pick up the check. Instead, Darwin had to pay for his wife's night out on the town while he was supposedly on a business trip. He began to wonder if this was a regular occurrence while he was sweating at work because some idiot didn't believe in lubricating the machinery. That's typical of him, Darwin thought, but he was surprised that Susan had paid the bill. At that restaurant, he would have owed more than $100. When the girls got up to go to the ladies' room, Darwin leaned over his glass, trying not to be noticed. They were giggling and having such a good time that they didn't even notice him. When they passed by, he turned to watch them leave. Darwin looked at them twice. "Damn it! Susan got rid of that red skirt last year. She said it was too tight and not proper for an older married woman and too short. She picked out clothes from her closet that she thought weren't appropriate for a decent wife and mother. And she was right. That damn thing only came down to the middle of her thighs. She couldn't sit down in public without putting on a show. If she hadn't been sitting at the table during dinner, she would have put on a show for the whole room. What the hell was she thinking, wearing that? Not only wearing it, but without her husband." Before the girls left, he paid the bill and went out to his car. Sitting in his company Ford, he watched the 3 tipsy friends get into his BMW. That made him angry, too. It was his damn car. He didn't want that jerk Randy driving it. Sure enough, when the BMW pulled out of the parking lot, Randy was behind the wheel, Susan was sitting next to him, and Darla was in the back seat. Darwin got in right behind them, making no attempt to hide that he was following them. He didn't care if they knew or not. He was furious. In any case, they had drunk too much to notice him unless he crashed into his own car. There seemed to be a lively discussion going on in the BMW, which ended with the girls patting each other on the arms and Randy turning the car around and heading for a less respectable part of town. Parking the BMW on the street, the 3 went window shopping at a 3-screen movie theater showing adult films. Parking directly in front of the BMW, Darwin watched as the 3 decided which movie to see, and Susan went to buy tickets. Randy wasn't going to spend a dime on the evening. His good buddy Darwin was paying for everything. Darwin was even paying for Randy to take his wife to a porn theater. Darwin walked down the street behind them and was close enough to hear his wife tell the ticket taker which movie they wanted to see. To his surprise, none of the 3 noticed him just a few steps behind them as they entered the theater. Watching Randy's hands move from one woman's ass to another in constant motion, Darwin bought a ticket for the same movie. Following them into the theater, he passed through the curtain at the door where 3 men and a baby was playing. The theater was almost empty. Paying no attention to the fact that he might be recognized, Darwin followed them through the curtain. Darla even turned around to see who was crowding behind them. But in the dark theater, with Darwin standing between her and the light, he was just a silhouette, and she didn't recognize her friend's husband. Darwin struggled to restrain himself from punching that bastard Randy and throwing both women over his knee. If it would have made any difference, he would have done so. Instead, he continued to swallow hard to keep from vomiting and stood there staring at the 3 in front of him. The trio stood looking around the nearly empty hall, not knowing where to sit, until Randy lifted both women's skirts and slapped their buttocks. Stopping at a row of seats about halfway down, he pushed Susan forward so she would walk in front of him. The bastard stuck his hand under Susan's skirt. Randy pulled his wife toward him, holding her buttocks under her short skirt. They stopped in the middle of the row and sat down on either side of Randy. Darwin slipped into the row behind the trio, sitting directly behind Randy. The 3 huddled together, the girls crowding around Randy, resting their heads on his shoulders. The son of a bitch didn't waste a second and made no attempt to hide what he was doing. Sitting behind Susan and her friends, Darwin was stunned to see that Susan had placed her purse on the seat next to her. He leaned forward and picked it up. Becoming increasingly upset and angry, Darwin leaned back in his chair and watched the 3 in front of him, turning off the porn movie on the screen. Sitting behind his wife and her companion for the evening, Darwin went beyond the nausea in his stomach, far beyond the searing rage that had filled him when he began to observe his wife's disgusting behavior. Now he was consumed by icy fury. Before, he had been on the verge of losing control completely, but now Darwin was in control of his hatred. There would be no sudden suicide, but there would be no forgiveness either. His wife had chosen this tonight. As soon as he left, she had arranged for Darla and her husband to go out with her tonight. She hadn't just left, which would have angered him enough on its own. He could have understood that, but he would still have been angry. The bitch was now playing the whore. This was the same woman who had pestered him to get her pregnant. She claimed she wanted to raise his child. Not in this lifetime, bitch. Remembering one of the things Susan always carried in her purse, he reached inside and pulled out a small can of pepper spray. This had gone too far. He was sure Randy wasn't the first man to get this close to his wife's body, and he couldn't take it anymore. Leaning forward, he stuck his head and arm between Randy's head and Susan's. There wasn't much room, and he roughly pushed both heads away to make space for himself. First, he turned and whispered in Susan's ear, "I think I'm going home, bitch. The doors will be locked, so find yourself another place to sleep tonight." Susan's eyes widened, and she turned to look at the face next to her. Drunk, she didn't immediately understand what had been said or who had said it. By the time she realized it was too late, the damage had already been done. The hand Darwin had slipped between Randy and Susan was holding a pepper spray can. Leaning forward, he sprayed it at Susan. It was meant for her eyes, but it worked well on any wet, sensitive tissue. Without waiting for Susan's reaction, he reached across Randy to do Darl a similar favor. Then, leaning back and pulling his head and arm out from under the writhing Susan, he sprayed Randy twice in the eyes. Susan was now gasping for air, bent over in pain as the spray took effect on her most sensitive areas. Darwin leaned forward again. "I'll take my BMW home, but you're not coming back to this house. Goodbye, bitch." Then he threw her purse and the pepper spray onto her knees. Taking a step back, he watched as both women bent over, clutching their crotches. They were in too much pain to make loud noises, certainly not loud enough to be heard over the movie's soundtrack. Randy rolled his eyes desperately, which were watering from the pain. Randy made noises, but they were barely audible over the loud music. He groaned, rocking back and forth in his seat. Outside, Darwin walked over to his Ford and looked around. Down the street was a well-lit, secure parking lot with signs advertising 24-hour surveillance. He drove up to it in his Ford, left the car, and returned to the BMW. When he approached, a couple of punks were examining the car, one of them holding a short piece of pipe where he thought it was hidden. Both punks looked at him closely as he walked toward them, trying to look casual. When he reached them, he stopped, took a step toward them, and asked if they knew where Alex's pawn shop was. He had seen it when he was driving up. The punks looked at each other, and Darwin noticed the wheels slowly turning in their heads as they tried to process what they had taken on tonight. "Sure, man," the one with the pipe started, and his buddy grinned and reached into his pocket. Not wanting to drag things out, Darwin hit him in the groin with the pipe. His knee shot up, lifting him 1/2 meter off the ground. The pain hit him, knocking the wind out of him. By the time he landed on his side, he was almost unconscious from the pain. Without turning, Darwin swung his left arm, extending his fingers forward and clenching them into a fist, as martial artists do, calling it a knife. He couldn't be careful, but he hoped he hadn't killed the bastard when he hit him in the throat. When the street thug fell to the ground, his hands flew to his throat. The brass knuckles he had worn on his fists fell to the street. Darwin picked up the brass knuckles, dragged the two thugs away from his BMW, and threw them onto the sidewalk. The guy whose larynx he had broken seemed to be breathing without much difficulty, so he probably hadn't killed him. At that moment, he didn't care whether he had killed him or not. Getting into his BMW, he immediately pulled away from the curb and drove off. Traffic was light, and he managed to turn the corner before the thugs realized he was gone. He didn't think anyone had seen him, but even if they had, no one in that part of town would have said anything. He got home without incident, locked the BMW in the garage, locked the doors and all the windows in the house. Turning off the lights, he went to bed. He couldn't sleep because he was still overcome with cold rage. He knew he shouldn't drink in this state, and it was another hour before the adrenaline left his system. The sunrise put an end to his nighttime musings. He loved Susan, but the woman he had seen last night was not the Susan he knew. This was a new side of Susan he couldn't live with. If he tried to save the marriage, he would always remember what she was capable of. He wanted children, but this woman was not the mother he wanted for his children. What if they had a couple of girls? The mere thought of it made him want to throw up on the ceramic altar. In broad daylight, Darwin transferred the money from their checking account to a savings account. He left only enough to cover 2 months of regular monthly expenses. He called several credit companies and other financial institutions, then hailed a taxi. The taxi dropped him off a mile from where his Ford was parked at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, when the walk was comfortable and safe. After paying the taxi driver, he headed for the airport. The flight from Houston on Thursday went without incident and was a day earlier than planned. From the airport, he drove straight to work to meet his boss. There, he handed him his resignation letter. This led to a heated reaction. Darwin had always valued his contribution to the company, but he had never believed that the company valued his services. That changed with a loud bang. When he tried to hand in his resignation letter, his boss politely asked him to wait while he consulted with HR. 20 minutes later, Darwin found himself in the CEO's office discussing how much his departure would cost the company. In the end, he agreed to stay on with a new title, Vice President of Corporate Services, and a 35% raise. He was given complete freedom to inspect all of the company's facilities and was put in charge of a small staff. This was agreed upon before he returned to work. Darwin complained that constant repairs were costing the company twice as much as regular maintenance. Over several years, plant managers had gradually reduced maintenance costs to such an extent that downtime was more expensive than keeping the equipment in working order. From that moment on, he would be the one to turn to when something went wrong, and he would be the one to make sure that the factory equipment was in working order. He assumed that his emergency trips would soon be a thing of the past. He would spend the rest of the year traveling, making sure that the reforms he wanted were implemented, and then he planned to stay close to home. When he arrived home in Taurus, Susan was not there. Darwin immediately began packing the boxes he had brought with him on the way home. Before he had finished in the bedroom, he saw that the movers he had called had arrived and immediately began loading the boxes into the truck. It didn't take him long to go through the entire house and gather the things he wanted to keep. He would remember this experience in the future. He used to keep everything that seemed interesting to him, but he would never do that again. By 3 o'clock, he was finished, and the truck had just pulled away when Susan pulled up in her Volvo. She left the car on the driveway and didn't notice that he had returned home until she walked into the kitchen, saw a man drinking coffee in the house, and screamed. Darwin just sat there and stared at her until understanding dawned in her eyes and the tension of fear left her. "My God, Dar, you scared me to death," she finally whispered. "I'm sorry, Susan," he replied. "I wasn't sure you'd be home." "Are you okay?" he asked, looking her over. "I was a little angry on Saturday night. I don't regret doing it, but I hope nothing serious happened." "Well," Susan replied, trying to smile. The smile came out almost sad. "I've been walking funny since Tuesday, but nothing serious happened. Poor Randy, he's in terrible shape. Darla says he'll be all right. For a while, the doctors couldn't tell if his eyesight was damaged." She looked at him seriously, then added, "When you're angry, you go all the way, don't you?" "I've never felt that way before, Susan. My reaction surprised even me. But I didn't expect you to be so promiscuous. I guess one extreme behavior led to another." "Oh, Dar, I'm so sorry. I can explain. It wasn't what it looked like." Darwin stared intently into her eyes for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, Susan." It was exactly what it looked like. She gasped and tried to interrupt him. He simply raised his hand to silence her. "Yes, it was. The woman I married, the woman I loved, would never have gone with another man. We won't go into details about whose husband it was or who else was with you. In the big picture, it doesn't matter. I can't love a woman who behaves like that, I can't trust you enough to leave you alone for a day or two. The woman I saw on Saturday night is definitely not going to be a good mother. And Susan, before you say anything, I've been watching you. This wasn't the first time you've been close to Randy. From the moment I saw you two at the restaurant, it was obvious that you two were a couple. Seems to be the word I'm looking for. Susan choked up again and tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. I've talked to my lawyer, Susan. The divorce papers will be mailed on Monday. Call my lawyer and give him your lawyer's name so we can get this over with. If you don't fight it, I want to make a fair settlement. I'm thinking of giving you the house, the Volvo, and a third of the money that was in our savings account when I left here on Sunday. I assume you've checked and know where I transferred the money. Raising his hand again to prevent her from interrupting, he continued. I have records of how much was in the account on Sunday, and a third of that amount will be yours. The value of the house and the car far exceeds the amount I'm keeping for myself. I'll keep the cash, my BMW, my corporate retirement account. Yes, and half of the money we get from selling the beach house. Susan, he continued, if you decide to sell this house, you can find a nice house and live on the remaining money indefinitely, if you're smart. I'm sorry I can't offer you more, but with the money you'll get, you can easily go back and finish your education. I pray that this experience will teach you what you risked with your behavior. Staring intently, and for a long time at the woman he had married, he could hardly recognize the woman he had seen last Saturday. But it was this woman, not the one he had asked to marry him, who would haunt him for years to come. He had to do it. The woman he had thought he was going to marry did not really exist. Susan just stared at him, a tear rolling down her cheek as he finished. I'm leaving. Have your lawyer call me at work, and I'll give him a number where he can reach me after hours. I'll need time to get settled, and until I do, I can't give you an address. Call me at work next week or on my cell, and I'll tell you where I'll be until I find an apartment or a condo. I'm so sorry this happened, Susan. But I didn't do this. I can't fix this. We can't fix this. I'll let you know when I come to pick up the Ford. With that, he walked out to the garage, got into his BMW, and drove out of the driveway. Susan followed him into the garage, shouting after him, Dar, it wasn't me on Saturday. Come back, we'll talk, honey, please. Everything got out of control. We can work this out. She was still shouting, now from the top of the driveway as he drove away.